The dust kicked up around her boots as Adelaide Fletcher limped through the center of McGill, Nevada, her left leg dragging slightly with each determined step, and she could feel every pair of eyes in the mining town tracking her movement like vultures circling wounded prey. It was August 1883, and the summer heat bore down mercilessly on the small settlement that had sprung up around the copper deposits, turning the main street into a furnace of hard-packed earth and shimmering air. Adelaide had made this walk dozens of times since arriving 3 months ago to help her aunt run the boarding house, but today felt different, heavier somehow, as if the weight of all those stairs had finally accumulated into something she could no longer ignore. She had been born with her left leg shorter than her right, a twist of fate that had marked her from her first breath in Sacramento 21 years ago. Her parents had loved her fiercely despite it, or perhaps because of it, teaching her that strength came in forms that had nothing to do with a perfect gait. But they were gone now, taken by fever within days of each other the previous winter, and Adelaide had found herself alone in the world except for her mother's sister Beatrice, who had written offering her a home in Nevada. The boarding house stood at the far end of town, a 2-story structure that had seen better days but remained sturdy enough to house the rotating crew of miners, drifters, and occasional businessmen who passed through McGill. Adelaide had grown to love the work, the rhythm of cooking and cleaning, the satisfaction of turning the worn rooms into something approaching comfort. What she had not grown to love was the town itself, or rather the particular cruelty that seemed to lurk in certain corners of it. "Look at her go," a voice called out from the shade of the saloon porch. Adelaide recognized it immediately as belonging to Vernon Schmidt, a barrel-chested man who worked at the smelter and seemed to take particular pleasure in making her life miserable. Like watching a 3-legged dog trying to run. Laughter erupted from the group of men lounging there, harsh and grating in the afternoon air. Adelaide kept her eyes forward, her hands clutching the basket of supplies she had purchased at the general store. Her aunt had taught her that responding only fed their appetite for meanness, that dignity lay in rising above it. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones were two entirely different things, and right now Adelaide's bones ached with humiliation. "Maybe we should get her a crutch," another voice chimed in. This one belonged to Frank Holloway, who fancied himself the town's unofficial mayor, despite having no actual authority beyond his loud mouth and his friendship with the mine supervisor. Or better yet, just carry her where she needs to go. Save us all the trouble of watching. More laughter, louder this time. Adelaide felt her cheeks burning, knew without looking that her face had gone scarlet. She focused on the boarding house in the distance, on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing through the tightness in her chest. Just a little farther, just a few more steps. "I got an idea," Vernon said, his voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "Why don't we have a race? Adelaide here versus old Mrs. Henderson? Bet the cripple couldn't even beat a woman twice her age." Mrs. Henderson was 73 and walked with a cane. The insult was so deliberately cruel that Adelaide felt something crack inside her, some last reserve of composure threatening to shatter. Her step faltered, and she had to catch herself, which only made the laughter intensify. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she hated herself for them, hated that these men could reduce her to this. "That is enough." The voice cut through the laughter like a knife through butter, deep and quiet, and carrying an authority that made every man on that porch go silent. Adelaide stopped walking, unable to help herself, and turned to see who had spoken. He stood in the street about 20 feet away, tall and lean in the particular way of men who spent their lives outdoors. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders that spoke of coiled strength. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, trail-worn denim and a faded blue shirt, a bandana tied loosely around his neck. His horse, a handsome bay gelding, stood patient beside him, reins loose in his hand. "Who the hell are you?" Vernon demanded, pushing off from the post he had been leaning against. The amusement had drained from his voice, replaced by something harder. The stranger took a few steps closer, and Adelaide could see his face more clearly now. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes that were a startling shade of gray-green. There was something calm about him, something steady, like a deep river that ran quiet but powerful. "Name is Lucas Ashford," he said, his voice still quiet but carrying perfectly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the street. "I am here about work at one of the ranches outside town, but that does not matter much right now." "Then why don't you mind your own business, Ashford?" Frank Holloway said, stepping forward to stand beside Vernon. The two of them made an imposing pair, both big men used to intimidating others through sheer size. Lucas looked at them for a long moment, and Adelaide saw something flicker in his eyes, something cold and hard that made her breath catch. "I am making it my business," he said. "What I just heard was about the lowest thing I've come across in a long while, and I have seen some pretty low things." "We were just having some fun," Vernon said, but there was an edge of defensiveness in his tone now. "Ain't no harm in it." "Fun." Lucas repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. He shifted his gaze to Adelaide, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical thing. His expression softened slightly, and he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. Then he looked back at the men on the porch, and the hardness returned. "You call mocking a woman for something she cannot help fun?" "She's a cripple," Vernon said flatly. "Everyone can see it. We are just saying what is true." Lucas was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower, forcing everyone to strain to hear him. "She walks taller than any of you." The words hung in the air like a declaration, simple and undeniable. Adelaide felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that pushed back against the cold humiliation that had been drowning her moments before. No one had ever said anything like that about her, had ever suggested that her limp was anything less than a failing, a weakness to be pitied or mocked. Vernon's face had gone red. "You got a lot of nerve, stranger, coming into our town, and she walks taller than any of you," Lucas repeated, cutting him off. "Because she goes about her business with dignity and grace, while you lot spend your afternoons tearing down a woman who has done nothing to you. I would say that makes her about 10 feet tall compared to you crawling in the dirt." Frank made a sputtering sound, but Vernon had gone very still, his jaw clenched tight. "You better watch your mouth, cowboy." "Or what?" Lucas's voice remained calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath it. "You going to do something about it? Because I will tell you right now, I am happy to settle this however you want. But understand something first." He paused, letting the moment stretch. "I do not back down, and I do not forget. So if you want to start something, you better be prepared to finish it." Adelaide found herself holding her breath. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut, and she could see other townspeople gathering at the edges, drawn by the confrontation. Part of her wanted to tell Lucas it was not worth it, that he should just let it go. But another part, a deeper part, was thrilling at watching someone finally stand up to Vernon and Frank. Vernon and Frank exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. They were bullies, Adelaide knew, and bullies tended to back down when faced with someone who would not be intimidated. Sure enough, after a long moment, Vernon shrugged with elaborate casualness. "Not worth my time," he muttered, turning back toward the saloon door. "Come on, Frank. Let the stranger have his moment." Frank followed, but not before shooting Lucas a look that promised this was not over. The other men on the porch filtered inside as well, the show apparently concluded, leaving Adelaide and Lucas standing in the street with a handful of curious onlookers still watching from a distance. Lucas turned to face her fully, and Adelaide felt suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Up close, he was even more striking than she had first thought, with a face that was all clean lines and honest features. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, white against his tanned skin, and his hair was a dark brown that caught hints of auburn in the sunlight. "I apologize if I overstepped, miss," he said, his voice gentler now. but I could not stand by and listen to that. Adelaide realized she had been staring and quickly dropped her gaze to her basket. No, thank you. You did not have to do that. Maybe not, Lucas agreed, but I wanted to. He took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. Are you all right? The question, asked with such genuine concern, threatened to undo her composure entirely. Adelaide blinked hard against the tears that wanted to fall and nodded. Yes, I am used to it, I suppose. You should not have to be used to it, Lucas said, and there was an edge of anger in his voice, though she sensed it was not directed at her. No one should speak to you that way. Adelaide looked up at him, meeting his eyes, and felt something pass between them, some connection she could not quite name. I am Adelaide Fletcher, she said softly. I live at the boarding house with my aunt. Lucas Ashford, he said, though he had already introduced himself. I just rode in today from California. Got work lined up at the Patterson Ranch, starts tomorrow. The Patterson place is good, Adelaide said, grateful for the shift to practical matters. Mr. Patterson is a fair man, from what I have heard. That is what I was told. Lucas glanced down the street toward the boarding house. Is it far for you to walk? I could give you a ride if you like. My horse is gentle. The offer was tempting, but Adelaide shook her head. Thank you, but I can manage. It is not much farther and— She hesitated, unsure how to explain that accepting would feel like admitting defeat, like confirming that she could not handle the simple act of walking home. Lucas seemed to understand without her having to say it. Of course, he said simply, but would you mind if I walked with you? I was heading that direction anyway, thought I might inquire about a room. It was a transparent excuse, Adelaide suspected, but she found herself nodding. We do have rooms available. My aunt would be happy to show you one. They fell into step together, Lucas leading his horse and adjusting his pace to match hers without making it obvious. Adelaide was acutely aware of her limp, of the uneven rhythm of her gait, but Lucas gave no sign of noticing or caring. Instead, he looked around the town with interest, taking in the buildings and the mountains rising in the distance. It is different from California, he commented. Harsher, maybe, but beautiful in its own way. You are from California originally? Adelaide asked, glad for the conversation to fill the silence. Born and raised near Sacramento, Lucas said. Worked on ranches there most of my life. But my folks passed a few years back, and I've been moving around since then, seeing different places, trying new things. I am sorry about your parents, Adelaide said quietly. I lost mine this past winter. Fever. Lucas looked at her with understanding in his eyes. I'm sorry, too. It is a hard thing being alone in the world. My aunt has been kind, Adelaide said, but yes, it is hard. They walked in companionable silence for a few moments, the boarding house drawing closer. Adelaide could see her aunt in the window of the front room, probably wondering what was taking her so long. The confrontation with Vernon and Frank already felt distant, pushed back by Lucas's presence and the strange sense of ease she felt around him. Can I ask you something? Lucas said as they approached the front steps of the boarding house. Of course. That thing you do, the way you walk, does it cause you pain? The question was so direct, so free of pity or prurience, that Adelaide found herself answering honestly. Sometimes, when I've been on my feet too long, or when the weather changes. But mostly I'm used to it. I was born this way. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. My mother had a cousin who was born with a clubfoot. He became a blacksmith, one of the best in the county. Used to say his leg taught him about working with things that were not quite perfect, about finding the strength in them anyway. Adelaide smiled, a real smile this time. I like that. I thought you might. Lucas tied his horse to the hitching post and followed her up the steps. The door opened before they reached it, and Beatrice Fletcher appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, with Adelaide's same auburn hair streaked with gray and warm brown eyes that took in the scene with quick intelligence. Adelaide, there you are. I was starting to worry. Her gaze shifted to Lucas, curious but welcoming. And you have brought a guest? "This is Lucas Ashford, Aunt Beatrice. He is looking for a room. He just arrived in town and will be working at the Patterson Ranch." Beatrice's expression brightened. "Well then, Mr. Ashford, you have come to the right place. We have several rooms available, all clean and comfortable. Meals are included and the price is fair. Come in, and I will show you what we have." Lucas followed them inside, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. The boarding house was cool after the heat of the street, and Adelaide breathed in the familiar smells of baking bread and lemon oil. Her aunt kept everything spotless, a matter of pride that Adelaide had learned to share. "If you will excuse me," Adelaide said, setting her basket on the hall table, "I need to put these supplies away and start on dinner preparations." "Of course, dear," Beatrice said, already leading Lucas toward the stairs. "Mr. Ashford, let me show you our best room on the second floor. It has a window that catches the morning sun and—" Their voices faded as they climbed the stairs, and Adelaide carried her basket to the kitchen. She moved through the familiar motions of unpacking, storing items in the pantry, checking the stove. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene in the street, the sound of Lucas's voice saying those words that had shifted something fundamental inside her. "She walks taller than any of you." Adelaide touched her chest, feeling her heart beat steady and strong beneath her palm. Something had changed today, she realized. Something important. And she had a feeling that Lucas Ashford, with his gray-green eyes and his quiet strength, was going to change even more before all was said and done. The evening meal at the boarding house was always a lively affair, with a long table in the dining room filled with whatever assortment of guests happened to be staying at the time. Tonight there were 7, including Lucas, who had indeed taken the room on the second floor after Beatrice had shown it to him. Adelaide helped her aunt serve the food, a hearty stew with fresh bread and apple pie for dessert, moving between the kitchen and the dining room with practiced efficiency. She was aware of Lucas watching her as she worked, though he was subtle about it, his eyes following her movements when he thought she would not notice. The other guests were mostly regulars, men she had come to know over her months in McGill, and they treated her with a casual friendliness that was neither warm nor cold, just the polite distance of people who shared space but not intimacy. "This stew is excellent, Miss Fletcher," said Henry Morrison, a quiet man who worked as a surveyor for the mining company. "You and your aunt have a real gift." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Adelaide said, refilling his water glass. "My aunt taught me everything I know about cooking." "Well, she's a fine teacher," Henry said, returning his attention to his meal. Lucas was seated at the far end of the table, next to a young clerk named David, who worked at the assayer's office. David was chattering away about the latest ore samples and their copper content, and Lucas was listening with polite attention, but Adelaide could tell his mind was elsewhere. When she came to refill his glass, he looked up at her with a small smile. "Thank you," he said quietly, "and thank you again for earlier, for letting me walk with you." "I should be thanking you," Adelaide replied, keeping her voice low so the others would not overhear. "What you said to those men, no one has ever stood up for me like that before." "Then folks around here need to do better," Lucas said simply. He held her gaze for a moment longer, and Adelaide felt that strange warmth in her chest again, that sense of connection that seemed to bypass all the normal formalities and social barriers. She excused herself and returned to the kitchen, where Beatrice was cutting the apple pie into generous slices. Her aunt looked at her with knowing eyes. "He seems like a good man, that Mr. Ashford," Beatrice said casually, "polite, respectful, and not hard on the eyes either." "Aunt Beatrice," Adelaide protested, but she could not help the smile that tugged at her lips. "I'm just making an observation," Beatrice said innocently. "It has been a long time since I've seen you smile like that, dear, not since before your parents passed." Adelaide sobered slightly at the mention of her parents. "He stood up to Vernon Schmidt and Frank Holloway today. They were mocking me again, and Lucas he told them I walk taller than any of them." Beatrice set down her knife and pulled Adelaide into a quick, fierce hug. "Good for him. Those men are bullies and cowards, and it is about time someone called them on it. I am just sorry it was not me." "You have done plenty, Aunt Beatrice," Adelaide said, hugging her back. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. You have never made me feel like I was less because of my leg." "Because you are not less," Beatrice said firmly. "You are my niece, and you are worth 10 of Vernon Schmidt, 20 of Frank Holloway. Do not ever forget that." They carried the pie slices out to the dining room, and the conversation shifted to dessert and compliments for Beatrice's baking. Lucas accepted his slice with thanks and ate with the appreciation of someone who had spent too many nights eating trail rations. When the meal was finished and the guests had dispersed to their rooms or out for the evening, Adelaide and Beatrice cleaned up in the kitchen while the last of the daylight faded outside the windows. "I am going to sit on the porch for a bit," Adelaide said when the last dish was dried and put away. "It is cooler outside than in." "Good idea," Beatrice said. "I will be up in my room reading if you need me." Adelaide stepped out onto the front porch, settling into one of the rocking chairs her aunt kept there. The evening air was indeed cooler, a relief after the stifling heat of the day, and the sky was turning that particular shade of purple that Nevada seemed to specialize in. The street was quiet, most people having retired indoors or to the saloon for their evening entertainment. She had been sitting there for perhaps 10 minutes when the front door opened and Lucas stepped out. He paused when he saw her, and Adelaide thought he might go back inside, but instead he gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Do you mind company?" "Not at all," Adelaide said, and meant it. Lucas settled into the chair with a satisfied sigh, stretching his long legs out in front of him. For a while they just sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of the town settling into night. Finally, Lucas spoke. "I have been thinking about what happened today," he said, "and I want you to know, if those men give you trouble again, I hope you will tell me. I know I'm just passing through, essentially, but while I'm here, I would like to help if I can." Adelaide looked at him in the gathering darkness. "Why?" "You do not know me. We only just met today." Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "When I was 16, I saw a man beat his horse half to death because it stumbled. I was young and stupid, and I just stood there and watched, too scared to say anything. That horse died 3 days later, and I have regretted my silence every day since. I promised myself I would never stand by and watch someone be cruel again, not if I could do something about it." "I am not a horse," Adelaide said, but there was no anger in her voice, only curiosity about this man who seemed so different from anyone she had known before. "No," Lucas agreed, "but the principle is the same. Cruelty is cruelty, and silence in the face of it is a kind of cruelty too. What those men said to you today was wrong, and I could not let it pass without speaking up. I would have done the same for anyone." "But you did not do it for just anyone," Adelaide pointed out. "You did it for me." Lucas turned to look at her, and even in the dim light, she could see the intensity in his eyes. "Yes," he said simply, "I did, and I'm glad I did. You deserve to have someone stand with you." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were different, born of gratitude and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not know what it meant to me, hearing you say those words." "I meant every one of them," Lucas said. "You do walk taller than those men. Taller than most people I have known, if I'm being honest. There is a strength in you. Adelaide Fletcher, I saw it today in how you held yourself, how you kept going even when they were trying to tear you down. That takes real courage." "I do not feel very courageous most days," Adelaide admitted. "Mostly I just feel tired. Tired of the stares, the whispers, the way people look at me like I am something broken that needs fixing." "Then they are not really looking at you," Lucas said. "They're looking at their own shallow ideas of what a person should be. The real you, the woman I walked with today, the woman who helps run this boarding house and cooks meals and smiles despite everything, she is not broken. She is whole and strong and worth knowing." Adelaide did not trust herself to speak. Instead, she reached out, a gesture born of impulse, and touched Lucas's hand where it rested on the arm of his chair. His skin was warm and calloused from hard work, and she felt him turn his hand over, his fingers curling gently around hers. They sat like that as the stars came out overhead, two people who had been alone in the world finding something unexpected in each other. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and strangely familiar. Lucas left early each morning for the Patterson Ranch, riding out before the sun was fully up, and returned in the evenings tired but satisfied with the day's work. He took his meals at the boarding house, always making a point to speak with Adelaide, asking about her day, sharing stories from the ranch. It was nothing remarkable on the surface, just the normal interactions of people living under the same roof, but Adelaide felt the undercurrent of something deeper building between them. Beatrice noticed, of course. Her aunt had always been observant, and she took to leaving Adelaide and Lucas alone whenever possible, making excuses about needing to tend to things upstairs or in her room. Adelaide would have been embarrassed by the obviousness of it if she had not been so grateful for the opportunity to get to know Lucas better. He was, she discovered, a man of many layers. On the surface, he seemed quiet and reserved, the kind of person who kept his own counsel and did not seek attention. But as she got to know him, Adelaide found a wry sense of humor, a deep thoughtfulness, and a fundamental decency that colored everything he did. He told her about growing up in California, about learning to ride before he could walk properly, about his parents who had been ranchers themselves before illness took them. He spoke about the loss with a matter-of-fact sadness that Adelaide recognized from her own grief, the kind that never fully went away but learned to coexist with joy. In turn, Adelaide found herself opening up to him in ways she had not with anyone else. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about the years of doctors and treatments that had done nothing to change her leg but had taught her that she was something to be fixed rather than accepted. She told him about her parents' love, which had been unconditional and fierce, and how their deaths had left her unmoored in a world that suddenly seemed much colder and less forgiving. "They were the only ones who never looked at me with pity," she said one evening, as they sat on the porch again. It had become their ritual, these evening conversations, and Adelaide had come to treasure them above all other parts of her day. Everyone else, even the people who meant well, they always had this look in their eyes like they felt sorry for me, but my parents just saw me. "That is how it should be," Lucas said. "That is how I see you." Adelaide looked at him, searching his face in the lamplight that spilled through the window. "Do you really?" "Yes," Lucas said without hesitation. "I see a woman who works harder than anyone I know, who takes care of her aunt and the guests at this boarding house with patience and grace, who has a smile that lights up her whole face when something genuinely amuses her, who reads books in her spare time, and has opinions about things and is not afraid to voice them. I see Adelaide, not a Limp." "I wish everyone could see me the way you do," Adelaide said softly. "Then they would be lucky indeed," Lucas replied, and the sincerity in his voice made Adelaide's breath catch. The tension between them was palpable now, something unspoken but undeniable. Adelaide could feel it every time their hands brushed as she served him dinner, every time their eyes met across the room, every time he said her name in that particular way he had, soft and careful, like it was something precious. She knew she was falling in love with him, had probably been falling since that first day when he had stood up for her in the street. The realization should have scared her, but instead it filled her with a strange, giddy hope. 2 weeks after Lucas had arrived in McGill, Adelaide was in town again, this time to collect a package that had arrived for her aunt at the post office. She had timed her trip for late morning when most of the men would be at work, but as she emerged from the post office with the package tucked under her arm, she found Vernon Schmidt blocking her path. Frank Holloway stood beside him, and 2 other men Adelaide did not know flanked them on either side. "Well, well," Vernon said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "If it is not our favorite cripple. Where is your cowboy today, Adelaide? Off playing with his cows." Adelaide's heart sank. She had hoped that Lucas's confrontation had put an end to their harassment, but clearly Vernon was not the type to let things go. She tried to step around him, but he moved to block her again, and Frank laughed at the movement. "We were just wondering," Frank said, "if your cowboy friend knows what he is getting into spending all that time with you. Has he figured out yet that you are damaged goods? That no real man is going to want a woman who cannot even walk right?" The words hit like physical blows, but Adelaide forced herself to stand straight, to meet Vernon's eyes without flinching. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "I need to get past." "Maybe you need a lesson in manners," Vernon said, taking a step closer. "Maybe you need to understand that having some stranger defend you does not change what you are. You are a cripple, Adelaide Fletcher, and that cowboy is going to figure it out sooner or later and move on to a real woman. That is enough." Adelaide's head whipped around to see Lucas striding toward them, his face set in hard lines. He must have been in town for supplies or some errand, and relief flooded through her at the sight of him. But it was mixed with dread, too, because there were 4 men facing him now, and she did not want him to get hurt on her account. "I thought we settled this," Lucas said, his voice dangerously quiet as he came to stand beside Adelaide. His presence was like a shield, solid and reassuring. "But apparently you are even dumber than I thought if you need the lesson repeated." "There are 4 of us and 1 of you, cowboy," one of the men Adelaide did not know said. He was younger than Vernon and Frank, maybe mid-20s, with a mean twist to his mouth. "Might want to reconsider your tone." Lucas looked at him with something approaching pity. "I am not reconsidering anything, and I'm not going to tell you again to leave this woman alone. I'm going to make you understand it." Things happened quickly after that. Vernon lunged forward, and Lucas met him with a right cross that sent the bigger man stumbling backward. Frank came at him from the side, but Lucas ducked under his swing and drove his elbow into Frank's ribs, following up with a punch that caught him in the jaw. The other 2 men rushed in, and suddenly it was a brawl in the middle of the street, dust rising as they grappled and fought. Adelaide wanted to scream, to run for help, but she found herself frozen, watching as Lucas held his own against 4 men. He was fast and skilled, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of experience, but he was outnumbered, and it was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed him. She saw Vernon recover and grab Lucas from behind, pinning his arms while the younger man drove his fist into Lucas's stomach. "Stop it!" Adelaide cried, finally finding her voice. "Please, stop! Let him go!" The shout came from behind her, and Adelaide turned to see Henry Morrison, the surveyor from the boarding house, running toward them. He was followed by 3 other men, all of whom Adelaide recognized from town. Decent people who had apparently seen the fight and decided to intervene. The odds suddenly evening out, Vernon's group hesitated, and Lucas wrenched free from Vernon's grip, spinning around to face them. "Walk away," Lucas said, breathing hard but still steady on his feet. "Right now, before this gets worse." Vernon looked at the gathering crowd, at Henry and the other men who had positioned themselves clearly on Lucas's side and seemed to calculate his chances. After a long, tense moment, he spat in the dirt and jerked his head at his companions. "This is not over," he said to Lucas, "not by a long shot." "Anytime you want to finish it, I will be here," Lucas replied calmly, "but leave Adelaide out of it. Your problem is with me now." Vernon and his group stalked off toward the saloon, and the crowd began to disperse, the excitement apparently over. Henry came over to Lucas, looking concerned. "You all right, Ashford? That was a hell of a fight." "I am fine," Lucas said, though Adelaide could see him favoring his left side where he had taken that punch to the ribs. "Thank you for stepping in." "Could not stand by and watch 4 men jump 1, Henry said. "That is not right, no matter the reason, though I suspect the reason was pretty clear." He nodded respectfully to Adelaide. "Miss Fletcher, are you all right?" "Yes, thank you, Mr. Morrison," Adelaide managed, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "Thank you for helping." Henry tipped his hat and headed off, leaving Adelaide and Lucas standing in the street. Adelaide could see the beginnings of a bruise on Lucas's cheekbone, and his knuckles were scraped and bloody. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand, examining it with gentle fingers. "You are hurt," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Lucas, you did not have to do that. You could have been seriously injured." "I told you," Lucas said, curling his fingers around hers. "I do not stand by and watch cruelty, and no one talks to you that way, Adelaide. No one." "But 4 against 1. "I do not care if it was 10 against 1, Lucas interrupted. "You are worth fighting for. Do you understand that? You are worth defending, worth protecting. I would do it again in a heartbeat." The tears Adelaide had been holding back spilled over, running hot down her cheeks. Lucas made a soft sound and pulled her into his arms, heedless of the people still watching, of propriety, of anything but the need to comfort her. Adelaide pressed her face against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. She had never felt so safe, so valued, so seen. "Come on," Lucas said after a moment, his voice gentle. "Let us get back to the boarding house. Your aunt will want to know you were safe, and I could use some water to clean up these hands." They walked back together, Lucas leading his horse with his uninjured hand while keeping Adelaide close with the other. Neither of them spoke, but Adelaide felt the shift between them as clearly as if something had been spoken aloud. This was no longer just a friendship, no longer just two lonely people finding comfort in each other's company. This was something deeper, something that had been forged in fire and tested with blood. Beatrice took one look at them when they entered the boarding house and immediately sprang into action, ushering Lucas into the kitchen and demanding to know what had happened. While Adelaide explained, her aunt cleaned and bandaged Lucas's hands with efficient movements, clucking her tongue over the state of his knuckles. "Those men are going to be trouble," Beatrice said grimly when Adelaide had finished the story. "Vernon Schmidt has a mean streak a mile wide, and he does not forget a slight." "I'm not worried about Vernon Schmidt," Lucas said, "but I am worried about Adelaide being in town alone. At least until this settles down." "I can take care of myself," Adelaide protested. "I have been dealing with men like Vernon my whole life." "I know you can," Lucas said, meeting her eyes. "But that does not mean you should have to. At least let me walk with you when you need to go into town. Please, Adelaide. For my peace of mind, if nothing else." Adelaide wanted to argue, to insist on her independence, but the look in Lucas's eyes stopped her. This was not about him thinking she was weak or incapable. This was about him caring, about wanting to protect someone he valued. And she realized, with a clarity that stole her breath, that she wanted him to care. She wanted his protection, his presence, his attention. She wanted him, period. "All right," she said softly. "I will let you know when I need to go into town." Lucas's expression eased into a smile, and Beatrice looked between them with barely concealed satisfaction. "Well then," her aunt said briskly, "now that that is settled, I think we all could use some lunch. Lucas, you should rest that side. I saw you favoring it." "Adelaide, help me in the kitchen." In the kitchen, with the door swung partially closed, Beatrice turned to Adelaide with a serious expression. "That man is in love with you," she said without preamble. "I hope you realize that." Adelaide felt her cheeks flush. "Aunt Beatrice, we have only known each other 2 weeks." "Sometimes that is all it takes," Beatrice said. "I knew I loved your uncle within a week of meeting him, God rest his soul. And I can see it in how Lucas looks at you, how he talks about you. More importantly, I can see how you look at him. You love him too, do you not?" Adelaide wanted to deny it, to say it was too soon, too complicated, but standing in her aunt's kitchen with the truth laid bare between them, she found she could not lie. "Yes," she whispered, "I think I do." "Then do not let fear hold you back," Beatrice said, pulling Adelaide into a hug. "Do not let that voice in your head that says you are not good enough or worthy enough stop you from reaching for happiness. You deserve love, Adelaide. You deserve a man who sees you for who you really are and values that. And I think Lucas Ashford is that man." Adelaide hugged her aunt back, drawing strength from the older woman's certainty. Maybe Beatrice was right. Maybe it was time to stop letting her limp, her past, her fear dictate her future. Maybe it was time to take a chance on the cowboy who had walked into her life and turned everything upside down. That evening, after dinner had been served and the dishes cleaned, Adelaide found Lucas on the porch again. He had washed up and changed clothes, but she could still see the bruise blooming on his cheek, the careful way he held himself because of his bruised ribs. She sat down in the chair next to him, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. "I need to tell you something," Adelaide said finally, gathering her courage. "I need you to know that what you did today, standing up for me again, fighting for me, No one has ever done anything like that for me before, and it made me realize something. What is that? Lucas asked, his voice soft in the darkness. That I am falling in love with you, Adelaide said, the words tumbling out in a rush before she could second-guess them. I know it is fast and maybe it is foolish, but I cannot help it. You make me feel seen and valued and strong. You make me feel like I am more than just my limp, more than just the girl people pity or mock. You make me feel like I am enough, exactly as I am. Lucas was very still, and for a moment Adelaide's courage faltered. Had she misread everything? Was she about to make a complete fool of herself? But then Lucas reached out and took her hand, threading their fingers together. And when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Adelaide Fletcher, I have been half in love with you since the moment I saw you in that street, holding your head high despite everything those men were saying. I have spent the last 2 weeks trying to convince myself it was too soon, that I was just lonely and you were just kind. But the truth is I have fallen completely and utterly in love with you. Your strength, your grace, your kindness, everything about you. I love how you laugh at my bad jokes and how you always make sure everyone at the boarding house feels welcome. I love how you move through the world with quiet determination, never letting anything stop you. I love you, Adelaide. All of you. Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of joy, pure and uncomplicated. I love you too, she whispered. I love you so much, Lucas. Lucas stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and then his hands were cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Adelaide only tilted her face up toward his. When their lips met, it was soft and sweet and perfect, a kiss that tasted like promises and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, Adelaide was breathless and smiling, and Lucas looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I know this is fast, he said, but I mean it, Adelaide. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to face whatever comes our way together. I want that too, Adelaide said, more than anything. They kissed again, longer this time, and Adelaide felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When they heard the front door creak and Beatrice's pointed cough, they broke apart, laughing like guilty children. I thought you two might want some privacy, Beatrice said, coming out onto the porch with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a knowing smile on her face. But not so much privacy that the whole town starts talking. Why do you not come inside? And we can have some tea and discuss this like civilized people? Over tea in the parlor, Lucas asked Beatrice formally for permission to court Adelaide, a gesture so old-fashioned and respectful that it made Adelaide fall in love with him even more. Beatrice gave her blessing with enthusiasm, extracting promises from Lucas to treat her niece well, and from both of them to not rush into anything foolish. But her eyes were warm, and Adelaide could tell her aunt was genuinely happy for them. The next few weeks were some of the happiest Adelaide had ever known. Lucas courted her properly, with walks in the evening and small gifts, wildflowers he picked on his way back from the ranch, a book he thought she would enjoy from the general store. They talked for hours, learning everything about each other, building a foundation of friendship alongside their growing love. Lucas met her at the boarding house every day after work, and they would sit on the porch or walk through town together, his presence a buffer against any potential harassment. Vernon Schmidt and his cronies kept their distance, though Adelaide could feel their eyes on her sometimes, sense the simmering resentment. Lucas had made an enemy, she knew, and it worried her. But Lucas seemed unconcerned, more focused on his work at the ranch and his time with Adelaide than on any potential threats. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after they had declared their love for each other, Lucas took Adelaide on a picnic outside of town. He borrowed a small wagon from the Patterson Ranch, loading it with a blanket and a basket of food that Beatrice had helped him prepare. They drove out into the countryside, away from the dust and noise of McGill, until they found a spot near a small creek where cottonwood trees provided shade. "This is beautiful," Adelaide said, looking around at the landscape. The mountains rose in the distance, purple against the blue sky, and the creek burbled pleasantly over smooth stones. It was peaceful here, removed from everything, just the two of them and the vastness of Nevada. Lucas spread the blanket and helped Adelaide settle onto it, then began unpacking the basket. There was fried chicken and biscuits, fresh fruit, and lemonade that was still cool from being kept in the spring house. They ate and talked, laughing over shared memories of the past weeks, making plans for the future. Lucas told her about his dream of owning his own ranch someday, a small operation where he could raise horses and cattle without answering to anyone else. Adelaide shared her own dreams, smaller and more domestic perhaps, but no less important to her. A real home. Children someday if she was blessed with them. A life built on love and partnership. "I have been thinking," Lucas said when they had finished eating and were lying side by side on the blanket, looking up at the sky through the cottonwood branches. "About the future, about us. And I know this is probably too soon, but I cannot help myself." He rolled onto his side, propping himself up on his elbow to look down at her. Adelaide's heart began to race, sensing what was coming. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, worn velvet that had clearly seen better days. "This was my mother's ring," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but clear diamond set in the center. "It is not much, but it meant everything to her, and it means everything to me. Adelaide Fletcher, I know we have only known each other for a little over a month, but in that time you have become the most important person in my world. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life loving you?" Adelaide sat up, tears blurring her vision as she looked at the ring, at Lucas's hopeful face, at this man who had changed everything. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Lucas's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, and Adelaide stared at it in wonder before throwing her arms around Lucas's neck and kissing him with all the love and joy she felt. They held each other there on the blanket, wrapped up in each other, and the promise of their future together, and Adelaide thought she had never been happier in her entire life. When they returned to the boarding house that evening, Beatrice took one look at Adelaide's glowing face and the ring on her finger and let out a whoop of joy that probably startled everyone in the building. She pulled them both into a fierce hug, crying and laughing at the same time, and declared that this called for a celebration. She immediately began planning, talking about weddings and dates and all the things that would need to be done, her enthusiasm infectious. "I was thinking maybe in 2 months," Lucas suggested when Beatrice finally paused for breath. "That would give us time to plan but not drag things out too long. I have been saving money, and I think with what I have put aside plus what I will earn over the next couple of months, we could afford a small house in town or a piece of land nearby where we could start building our own place." 2 months sounds perfect," Adelaide agreed. "And I do not need anything fancy, Lucas. Just you and me and the people we care about." "That is all I want too," Lucas said, squeezing her hand. "But you deserve a real wedding, Adelaide. Something to remember, something that marks this moment as the beginning of our life together." They set the date for early October, when the brutal heat of summer would have broken and the weather would be more pleasant. Beatrice threw herself into preparations with the zeal of someone who had been waiting years for her niece to find happiness, and Adelaide found herself caught up in a whirlwind of dress fittings, menu planning, and guest lists. The wedding would be small, held in the small church at the edge of town, with a reception afterward at the boarding house. Word spread through McGill about the engagement, and the general response was positive. Most people seemed genuinely happy for Adelaide and Lucas, their love story having become something of local interest. But there were exceptions, and Vernon Schmidt was chief among them. Adelaide heard from Henry Morrison that Vernon had been heard in the saloon saying nasty things about her, about how Lucas was making a mistake marrying a cripple, how he would regret it as soon as he had to deal with a wife who could not keep up with ranch work. Lucas heard the same rumors, and though he was furious, Adelaide begged him not to confront Vernon again. "We have a wedding to plan," she reminded him. "We have a future to build. Please do not let men like Vernon Schmidt ruin this for us. They are not worth it." Lucas reluctantly agreed, though Adelaide could tell it went against every instinct he had. Instead, he channeled his energy into working extra hours at the ranch, saving every penny he could toward their future. Mr. Patterson, who had grown fond of Lucas in the months he had worked for him, offered to let them live in a small cabin on the ranch property until they could afford their own place. It was generous, and Lucas accepted gratefully, knowing it would allow them to save money faster. As the wedding date approached, Adelaide found herself growing nervous. Not about marrying Lucas, that was the one thing she was completely certain of, but about everything else. What if she could not be a good wife? What if her leg made things harder for Lucas, held him back from achieving his dreams? What if the cruel voices that had followed her all her life turned out to be right, and she really was not enough? Lucas seemed to sense her doubts without her having to voice them. One evening, about a week before the wedding, he took her hands and looked into her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. "I know you are scared," he said softly. "I know you have doubts. But Adelaide, I need you to hear this and believe it. You are not a burden. You are not holding me back. You are not less than because of your leg. You are the woman I love, the woman I have chosen to spend my life with, and I consider myself the luckiest man alive that you chose me in return. Whatever challenges we face, we will face them together. And I promise you, I will spend every day for the rest of our lives making sure you know how valued and cherished you are." Adelaide let the tears fall, not bothering to wipe them away. "I love you so much," she whispered. "Sometimes I feel like I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It is not a dream," Lucas said, pulling her close. "This is real, Adelaide. We are real. And in 1 week, you are going to be my wife, and we are going to start building the life we both want, together." The week passed in a blur of final preparations. And then suddenly it was October 5th, 1883, and Adelaide was standing in front of a mirror in the church's small back room, looking at herself in her wedding dress. It was simple, made of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, but Beatrice had sewn it with love, and Adelaide thought she had never looked prettier. Her hair was pinned up in a soft style, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Lucas had picked for her that morning. "You are beautiful," Beatrice said, standing behind her with tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of you, sweetheart, so proud and so happy." "I wish they could be here," Adelaide said, her own eyes filling. "Both of them." "They are here," Beatrice assured her, placing a hand over Adelaide's heart. "Right here. And in every moment of joy you experience. They loved you so much, Adelaide, and now Lucas loves you just as much. You are blessed, my dear girl. So blessed." There was a soft knock on the door, and Henry Morrison poked his head in. "It is time, Miss Fletcher. Are you ready?" Adelaide took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. "Yes, I am ready." She had asked Henry to walk her down the aisle, since her father was gone and Henry had been so kind in standing up for Lucas during the fight. He offered her his arm, and together they walked to the church's entrance. Through the open doors, Adelaide could see the small gathering of guests, maybe 20 people total, all people who had come to mean something to her and Lucas during their time in McGill. And at the front, standing next to the minister, was Lucas. He looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face clean shaven. But it was his expression that made Adelaide's heart skip, the way his entire face lit up when he saw her, the love and awe written so clearly there that it took her breath away. She forgot about her limp, forgot about the uneven rhythm of her walk, forgot about everything except Lucas waiting for her at the end of that aisle. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Lucas he could kiss his bride, Lucas cupped Adelaide's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. The small church erupted in applause and cheers, and then they were walking back down the aisle together, Adelaide's hand tucked into the crook of Lucas's elbow, man and wife. The reception at the boarding house was lively and warm, with food and music and laughter. Mr. Patterson gave a toast to the happy couple, praising Lucas as one of the best workers he had ever employed and welcoming Adelaide to the ranch. Beatrice cried through her own toast, speaking of her niece's strength and courage, of how proud she was to see Adelaide so happy. And Lucas, when it was his turn, simply raised his glass and said, "To my wife, the strongest person I know. To Adelaide, who walks taller than anyone I have ever met." The guests cheered, and Adelaide felt her heart might burst from happiness. This was real. This was her life now. She was Adelaide Ashford, beloved wife, and the future stretched out before her bright with possibility. Lucas and Adelaide spent their wedding night in the small cabin on the Patterson Ranch, the same cabin that would be their home for the foreseeable future. It was cozy, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen area, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Lucas carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and then they were alone, truly alone, for the first time as husband and wife. They made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other in this new way, and afterward, lying wrapped in each other's arms, Adelaide felt a peace she had never known before. She belonged here, with this man, in this life they were building together. Her limp, which had defined so much of her existence, felt like just one small part of who she was rather than the whole story. Lucas loved her, all of her, and that love had transformed everything. The next morning, Adelaide woke to find Lucas already up, making coffee in the small kitchen. She wrapped a blanket around herself and joined him, and he pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashford," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Good morning, Mr. Ashford," she replied, loving the sound of her new name. They spent the day settling into the cabin, arranging their few possessions, making it feel like home. Lucas had to return to work the next day, but for now they had this time together, and they savored every moment of it. Life as a married couple quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm. Lucas worked long hours at the ranch, and Adelaide took on work helping Beatrice at the boarding house a few days a week while also managing their little cabin. It was hard work, but it was satisfying, and they were happy. In the evenings, they would sit together on the small porch of their cabin, watching the sunset over the mountains and talking about their dreams for the future. Lucas continued to save money diligently, and after about 6 months of marriage, he approached Adelaide with an idea. "What would you think about us buying our own piece of land? Not a big ranch, not yet, but maybe 20 or 30 acres where we could start small. Raise some horses, maybe a few head of cattle. Build our own house." Adelaide's eyes lit up. "Do you really think we could afford it?" "I have been talking to Mr. Patterson, and he knows of a piece of land for sale not too far from here. The owner is getting old and wants to move closer to his daughter in California. It is a good price, and with what we have saved plus a small loan, I think we could swing it. It would be tight, and we would have to be careful with money, but we could make it work." "Then let us do it," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Let us build something of our own, Lucas." They purchased the land in March of 1884, and Lucas began the work of building them a house. He did most of it himself on Sundays and in the evenings after work, with help from Mr. Patterson and some of the other ranch hands who had become friends. Adelaide helped where she could, and slowly, over the course of that spring and summer, a small but sturdy house took shape. 2 bedrooms, a main room, and a kitchen with a real stove. It was modest, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and their shared sweat. They moved in during September, and Adelaide cried as she crossed the threshold of their new home. This was everything she had dreamed of, everything she had thought might be beyond her reach. A home, a husband, a life filled with purpose and love. Over the next few years, their little ranch grew slowly but surely. Lucas proved to have a real gift for working with horses, and word spread about his skill. People started bringing him animals to train, paying him for his expertise, and the extra income allowed them to expand their herd. Adelaide managed the household and took on sewing work, altering and mending clothes for people in town. Her limp never went away, and there were still days when it caused her pain, but it had ceased to be the defining feature of her life. She was Lucas's wife, a rancher, a businesswoman in her own right. The limp was just part of who she was, no more or less important than the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. In the spring of 1885, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted children desperately, but she worried about whether her body could handle pregnancy and childbirth, whether her leg would make things more difficult. Lucas held her while she cried out her fears, then made her look at him. "You are the strongest person I know," he said firmly. "If anyone can do this, it is you. And I will be with you every step of the way, Adelaide. You are not alone in this." Dr. Harrison, the town's physician, examined her and pronounced her fit for pregnancy. "Your leg will not affect your ability to carry or deliver a child," he assured her. "You may find it more uncomfortable toward the end, with the extra weight, but there is no reason to believe you cannot have a perfectly healthy pregnancy." Adelaide clung to those words through the long months that followed. The pregnancy was indeed uncomfortable, especially as she grew larger and her balance shifted, but she managed. Lucas was attentive and patient, taking on extra work around the house without being asked, never complaining when Adelaide was too tired or too sick to do her usual tasks. In December of 1885, during the early hours of a cold morning, Adelaide went into labor. Lucas rode hard to fetch Dr. Harrison and Beatrice, and then there was nothing to do but endure. The labor was long and difficult, Adelaide gritting her teeth through hours of pain, while Lucas held her hand and whispered encouragement. But finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's cry. "It is a boy," Dr. Harrison announced, placing the squalling infant in Adelaide's arms. "A healthy baby boy." Adelaide looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and perfect little fingers, and felt love like she had never known wash over her. Lucas was crying openly, staring at their child with wonder and awe. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered. "Adelaide, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Lucas's father, and he became the center of their world. Adelaide had worried she might not be able to care for an infant with her limp, but she discovered that motherhood came as naturally to her as breathing. She learned to manage, to adapt, to do what needed to be done. And Lucas was a devoted father, taking on his share of feedings and diaper changes without complaint. 2 years later, Adelaide gave birth again, this time to a daughter they named Rose after Adelaide's mother. The birth was easier this time, and Adelaide recovered quickly. Their little family felt complete. 2 children running around the ranch, filling it with noise and laughter and life. Vernon Schmidt had largely left them alone over the years, though Adelaide knew he still harbored resentment. He had gotten into some trouble with the law, something about cheating at cards, and had spent some time in jail. When he got out, he seemed diminished somehow, and Adelaide almost felt sorry for him. Almost, but not quite. Some people were just determined to be bitter, she had learned, and there was nothing you could do about it except live your own life as fully as possible. In the summer of 1888, Adelaide was hanging laundry on the line behind their house when she heard the sound of riders approaching. She turned to see Mr. Patterson and another man she did not recognize pulling up in front of the house. Lucas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Lucas," Mr. Patterson called out, dismounting. "Got someone I want you to meet. This here is Thomas Wright, cattle buyer out of California. He heard about your reputation with horses and wanted to talk to you." Adelaide moved closer, curious, as Lucas shook hands with the stranger. Thomas Wright was a prosperous-looking man in his 50s, well-dressed and confident. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "I have heard impressive things about your work. I have a string of horses that need training, difficult animals that no one else seems able to handle. I am prepared to pay top dollar for someone with your skills." Lucas glanced at Adelaide, and she could see the excitement in his eyes. This was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for them. "I am interested," Lucas said carefully, "but I would need to know more about what you are asking." They talked for over an hour, Adelaide listening from the porch where she was entertaining Rose while James played in the yard. The deal Thomas Wright was offering was substantial. If Lucas could successfully train his horses, the payment would be enough for them to significantly expand their own operation. It was a risk, taking on such a big job, but it was also a chance they might not get again. That evening, after the children were in bed, Lucas and Adelaide discussed it seriously. "It would mean a lot of work," Lucas said. "Long hours, probably 6 days a week for the next few months. I would have less time with you and the children." "But it could secure our future," Adelaide pointed out. "It could give us the financial cushion we have been working toward. We could hire help, expand the house, maybe even start breeding our own horses instead of just training others." "What do you think I should do?" Lucas asked, trusting her judgment as he always did. Adelaide took his hand, looking into the gray-green eyes she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I think you should take the job. I think this is what we have been working toward, and we cannot let fear of the work stop us. We will manage, Lucas. We always do." Lucas took the job, and the next few months were grueling. He worked from dawn until well after dark most days, coming home exhausted but satisfied. Adelaide managed the ranch and the children, taking on more of the daily work herself. Her leg ached from the extra burden, but she pushed through, determined to do her part. The hard work paid off. Lucas successfully trained all of Thomas Wright's horses, and the man was so impressed that he became a regular client, referring others to Lucas as well. Word spread about Lucas Ashford's skill, and suddenly they had more work than they could handle. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the day-to-day operations, and Lucas focused primarily on training while Adelaide managed the business side of things, keeping track of clients and payments. By 1890, their little ranch had grown into a thriving operation. They had expanded their house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. They had over 100 acres now, a healthy herd of cattle, and a barn full of horses in various stages of training. They employed 5 hands regularly, and Lucas had developed a reputation throughout Nevada and into California as one of the best horse trainers in the region. Adelaide stood on their front porch one evening, watching the sun set and feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. They had built this, she and Lucas together. Against all odds, against all the voices that had told her she was not enough, she had created a life of purpose and meaning. She ran a successful business, raised 2 beautiful children, and loved a man who loved her in return with his whole heart. "Mama!" James came running around the corner of the house, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's dark hair and her green eyes. "Rose took my toy horse." Adelaide smiled, bending down to scoop him up despite the twinge in her leg. "Well, we will just have to sort that out, will we not? Come on, let us go find your sister." That night, lying in bed with Lucas's arm around her, Adelaide reflected on how far they had come. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked softly. "When you stood up to Vernon Schmidt in the street?" "Of course," Lucas murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "That was the day my life changed, the day I met the woman I was going to marry." "Did you really know even then?" "I knew something," Lucas said. "I knew you were special, that you were someone worth knowing, worth fighting for. And I have never regretted that first instinct, not for one single moment." Adelaide turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight that streamed through their window. "I love you, Lucas Ashford, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too, Adelaide Ashford, more than words can say." They kissed, slow and deep, and Adelaide felt the familiar spark of desire mixed with the deeper, steadier warmth of a love that had been tested and proven through years of partnership. This was what she had always wanted, always dreamed of, even when she had not let herself believe it was possible. A partner, a true partner, who saw her as an equal, who valued her contributions, who loved her without reservation or qualification. In the years that followed, their ranch continued to prosper. James and Rose grew into confident, capable children who knew nothing but love and support from their parents. Adelaide's limp remained a constant companion, but it had long since ceased to limit her in any meaningful way. She had learned to work around it, to adapt, and the people who knew her barely noticed it anymore. She was Adelaide Ashford, successful rancher and businesswoman, devoted wife and mother. The limp was just part of her story, not the whole thing. Lucas's reputation continued to grow, and in 1893 he was invited to demonstrate his training techniques at a horse show in San Francisco. It was a huge honor, and Adelaide insisted he go despite his reluctance to leave the family for the 2 weeks the trip would require. She managed the ranch in his absence with the help of their hands, proving once again that she was just as capable as any man when it came to running their operation. When Lucas returned, he brought stories of the big city, of the crowds and the excitement, and a third-place ribbon that James and Rose claimed immediately as their own. But more importantly, he brought new contacts, new opportunities. Their business expanded further, and by the time the new century rolled around in 1900, Lucas and Adelaide Ashford were considered one of the most successful ranching families in the region. Adelaide was 38 years old when she stood on their porch on New Year's Day 1900, looking out at the land they had built their life on. James was 14 now, already helping his father with the training, showing the same natural gift Lucas had. Rose was 12, clever and quick, with a head for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the business side of the ranch. And Lucas, now 42, was still the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, perhaps a little grayer and with more lines around his eyes, but still strong and steady and completely devoted to her. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "How far we have come," Adelaide said, leaning back against him. "How different my life is from what I thought it would be when I first came to McGill 17 years ago." "Better or worse?" Lucas asked, though there was a teasing note in his voice that said he already knew the answer. "So much better," Adelaide said, turning in his arms to face him. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me that, Lucas. You and your stubborn refusal to let anyone tell me I was less than I am." "I did not give you anything," Lucas corrected gently. "I just saw what was already there. You are the one who built this life, Adelaide. You are the one who refused to let anything hold you back. I just had the privilege of being by your side while you did it." Adelaide kissed him, pouring 17 years of love and gratitude into that single gesture. "We did it together," she said when they finally pulled apart. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built it together, and I would not change a single moment of it." "Not even the hard parts?" Lucas asked. "The long hours, the financial worries, the times when it felt like we might not make it?" "Especially not those parts," Adelaide said firmly, "because those were the moments that proved what we are capable of, together. Those were the moments that showed me that I married the right man, that we could weather any storm as long as we faced it side by side." Lucas pulled her close again, and they stood there on their porch, watching the first sunrise of the new century paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind them they could hear the stirring of their children waking, the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Their life, the one they had built from nothing but love and determination and a refusal to let the world define them by their limitations. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. James married a sweet girl from town when he was 22, and they settled in a house Lucas had helped them build on the far edge of the property. Rose went to college in California, one of the first women in the region to do so, and returned with a degree in business and a fierce determination to help expand the family ranch even further. By the time Adelaide was 50, she was a grandmother 3 times over, with James and his wife providing a steady stream of grandchildren who filled the main house with laughter and chaos on weekends and holidays. Rose had never married, perfectly content to pour her considerable energy into the ranch and the various business ventures she had started on the side. She had inherited her mother's strength and her father's calm determination, and Adelaide was intensely proud of the woman her daughter had become. Lucas, at 60, had slowed down somewhat, turning over more of the daily training work to James while he focused on the breeding program and consulting work that took him around the region. But he was still strong, still vital, and still completely devoted to Adelaide. They had been married for over 30 years, and Adelaide loved him more now than she had on their wedding day, if such a thing was possible. One evening in the summer of 1910, Adelaide and Lucas sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, watching the sun set over their land. Adelaide's leg had gotten worse with age, arthritis adding to the original problem, and she walked with a cane now. But it did not slow her down much, and she still managed the household and the business side of the ranch with the same efficiency she always had. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Lucas asked, echoing a conversation they had had many times over the years. "The day we met?" "All the time," Adelaide admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how small I felt, how sure I was that I would never have what other women had, that I would always be defined by my limp. And now?" Adelaide smiled, reaching over to take Lucas's hand. "Now I know that the only person who ever really defined me was myself. Yes, I have a limp. Yes, it has made some things harder, but it never stopped me from having the life I wanted. It never stopped me from finding love, building a family, creating something meaningful. Those men who mocked me all those years ago, they were wrong, and you were right." "About what?" "About me walking taller than any of them." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "Because I do, Lucas. Not despite my limp, but because of everything I have learned and become while living with it. It taught me strength, resilience, compassion. It made me who I am, and I would not change that for anything." Lucas raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You have always walked taller than everyone else, Adelaide Ashford, from the very first moment I saw you, and I have been honored every single day to walk beside you." They sat there as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded both their dreams. Adelaide's limp, which had once seemed like such an insurmountable obstacle, had become just one thread in the rich tapestry of her life, important but not defining, present but not limiting. Years later, when Adelaide and Lucas were both in their 70s and watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard of the ranch that had grown into one of the most successful operations in Nevada, Adelaide would sometimes think back to that young woman who had limped through the streets of McGill, Nevada, trying so hard to hold her head high while men mocked her. She would think about how impossible it had seemed then that she could ever have this life, this love, this family. And she would feel profound gratitude for the cowboy who had seen her true worth when she had almost forgotten it herself, who had loved her not despite her perceived flaws, but for the whole person she was. Lucas Ashford died peacefully in his sleep in 1926 at the age of 68, with Adelaide holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, feeling the loss of her partner, her love, her other half. But she did not break under the grief because Lucas had taught her long ago that she was stronger than she knew. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that respected and revered her. Adelaide Fletcher Ashford died in 1931 at the age of 69, in the house she and Lucas had built together all those decades ago. She was surrounded by family, holding the hand of her daughter Rose, and her last words were a whisper of Lucas's name. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking their ranch, under the wide Nevada sky they had both loved so much. At the funeral, James stood before the gathered crowd of family, friends, and community members who had come to pay their respects, and told the story his mother had told him many times over the years, about a young woman with a limp who had come to McGill feeling small and broken, and about a cowboy who had seen her true worth. about how he had stood up to bullies and said words that had changed her life. "She walks taller than any of you." "My mother did walk taller than most people," James said, his voice thick with emotion, not because she did not have struggles or challenges, but because she faced them with courage and grace. She built a life of meaning and purpose. She loved deeply and was deeply loved in return. She raised her children to see the worth in every person, regardless of what they looked like or how they walked. And she taught us that our limitations, whatever they might be, do not define us unless we let them. My mother was Adelaide Ashford, and she was the strongest person I have ever known. The words echoed across the hillside, a final tribute to a woman who had refused to be defined by other people's cruelty or limitations, who had found love and built a legacy that would endure for generations. Adelaide and Lucas's ranch remained in the family, passed down through the years, a testament to what two people could build when they believed in each other and refused to let the world tell them what was possible. And sometimes on summer evenings when the light was just right, family members swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the main house, holding hands and watching the sunset, together even in death as they had been in life. Whether it was real or just wishful thinking did not really matter. What mattered was the story, the love, the proof that one person's belief in another could change everything, that standing up against cruelty mattered, that love could overcome any obstacle. Adelaide Fletcher had limped into McGill, Nevada in 1883, a young woman who felt small and defeated. She had left this world as Adelaide Ashford, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and successful rancher, a woman who had lived fully and loved deeply and proven that the only real limitation was believing in the cruel words of small-minded people. She had walked taller than any of them, just as Lucas had said, and her legacy would continue to inspire her family for generations to come. The end.